Ed Kuepper, welcome to Australian Musician.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
We're talking to you about a few things. You've got 3 record releases and a tour to chat about. Let's first talk about the new 7-inch pressing of I'm Stranded, the Saint single, which has been released by an LA label, The Red. How did they get involved?
In the Red, they were. Look, I actually don't remember the details. We've been talking about doing this for quite some time. We were looking at it coinciding with. I'm a bit vague here with the. I think we started looking at doing it a couple of years ago to coincide with the 45th anniversary, which would have put it out in 2021. And I think Lariat in the Red was, I don't know, he was just really enthusiastic and had a good track record for this kind of thing. Because, these days vinyl is a boutique kind of release. It's just completely different to the time when the original single came out. Just massive enthusiasm and the ability to distribute it, which was borne out in the fact that it sold out in about an hour. So
yeah, I was going to say there were only 2,000 copies. It would have surprised me if there were any left.
I think I'm not sure if there's 2,000 of each of the variants.
Right.
I'm not 100% sure on that. I will. I promise to look into that more deeply. I mean, it's just such a strange kind of thing to do these days. To put out these little releases. Once they're sold out, they're gone, kind of thing. It was all part of a program to kind of just reissue the first 3, the material from the first 3 albums, the original band, and this was step 1 sort of thing, and it's a slow process.
Yeah. The Saints predated the UK punk movement, as did the Stooges, MC5. When UK punk hit, everybody wanted to join a band, whether they could play or not. How do you rate the Saints' level of musicianship back then?
Well, we had been going, like we formed in Ivor and I were still in high school. Chris would have been if he had have not dropped out. That was in 1973. So yeah, it was a fair bit before the UK punk scene happened. As far as rating us as musicians, using the sort of standards of the time, I think we were very much on the outside of what would have been considered being an Australian musician. In fact, there was I remember a letter written into a magazine. I don't remember what it was, but it was in the days when you had your pop press, like Go Set, Ram, Duke, those kind of things. There were also like a couple of more serious sort of magazines. And I remember there was a letter to the editor in one of those magazines, which I wish I still had because I can't remember it exactly, but it said something like they were embarrassed to be an Australian musician if someone like me was presented to the world as being indicative of what Australian musicians could actually do. So it was the band was definitely seen as out. Everything that we did in some ways would have been perceived as being completely wrong and an affront to good taste and that sort of thing. And that was fine. That was good. I was quite happy with that. I wasn't looking at joining a club. I was a musician. I was an artist, but I didn't see myself as somebody that could just, you know, do. It's kind of hard to explain. I mean, what we were aiming for was what we got, and that involved developing our own way of playing. I mean, one of the things that I think was quite strong about the Saints was the rhythmic approach that Ivor and I developed in my parents' garage, which was really different to the usual, you know, the drums were playing to the guitar. Some of this developed because we just never had a full band. You know, we were always lacking somebody. It was difficult to get people to actually play with us. And but yeah, how do I see us? I think in the way that I judge music and musicians, I think we were very good. The way other people would judge it would be that we were shithouse.
Yeah.
A disgrace, you know.
The reason I
Um,
because I interviewed Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols once, and he said he was always pissed off that they said that the Pistols couldn't play. Probably Sid Vicious aside, who
yeah.
wasn't a great musician, he always thought that they weren't too bad.
Yeah, well, I'd go beyond that with the Saints. I think we weren't trying to be recognised as being great musicians, because I just didn't like a lot of the stuff that, you know, real musicians were doing. So it kind of developed, and as we got out of Brisbane and was sort of thrown into the whirlpool of the music industry, things developed very quickly. We did, you know, 3 albums in the space of 18 months or something, and they're all quite different. And, you know, they're all recognizably the Saints, but there's a sort of a musical shift. And I won't call it a progression, because I don't actually know if I believe in that. You know, like a lot of the music that I really love is quite primitive, and it doesn't progress. You know, it is something. It sort of hit the ground running in a lot of ways, which I think in some ways, because we had those couple of years of just, you know, playing in garages, playing parties and things, because nobody would hire us. That helped. So, you know, by the time that whole punk thing hit, we were already kind of a bit beyond that. And but it was good for us, because without the punk thing happening in the UK, it's unlikely that we, you know, we would have recorded another single or two, you know. But that that sort of musical explosion that happened in the mid-70s sort of benefited us in terms of that. It just shifted the way that people were looking at things. It confronted critics in a lot of ways. I mean, the Saints' early reviews in Australia were dreadful. They were just couldn't come to terms with it. There was a review in Duke magazine, which is so bad that, you know, I had it framed.
I actually worked at Duke for 9 years.
Did you? Did you know a fellow called Jamie Dunn? He was a...
No, but being a Duke, Jamie Dunn, I'm not sure. It may not have been a real person.
No, Jamie Dunn was. He was
Okay.
actually he actually went on and had a successful career as a DJ, like an FM radio kind of guy. I think he was aggro.
Right, because there were a lot of
You know the puppet, that puppet character, the television, not radio. He might have been on radio as well. But anyway, no, he was a singer songwriter. He did a really awful solo album. Anyway, that's enough about him.
Yeah. The other thing about the rock sound back then was the bass was very much mixed to the background. The sound was very treble heavy. Was that by choice, or more that technology couldn't reproduce those deep frequencies?
Oh, no. I think you'd be talking about the first album more so than the second and third album. I think the second and third album have a much more. I mean, in some ways, they're equally as radical records, but the kind of technical standard of the mixing was better. On the first album, I think part of that amount of treble was that um, none of us had particularly good stereos at home. So what we were listening to, what we were expecting to hear back, was kind of a bit different. You know, we had been playing for a while, but we weren't very experienced. And the other thing that we did was, and I think you do this if you're in a studio and you're not used to the quality of the studio monitors, is to turn things up really loud. And when you've got things up really loud, you're hearing that bass. You know, you hear more bass when you have that volume. And I think, you know, I was hearing plenty of bass. But also, you know, one of my favorite records at that time was Raw Power by the Stooges, and that always, the original mix of that always gets criticized for not having enough bass. And yet to me, it sounds perfectly balanced, you know, and to me it sounds like it's almost like it's a 1950s rock and roll record where you don't have that amount of bass at the fore. And I liked a lot of 50s stuff, you know, so that sort of, they were my sort of sonic guidelines initially. And, you know, as time develops, you kind of change that a little bit. So yeah, I think that those albums are a product of their time, as far as I'm concerned. You know, that's what I wanted to be doing at that stage, sort of thing. And they have some flaws. There are also a couple of technical problems that happened in the recording of the first album. There was some phase cancellation and that sort of thing, which, you know, we had no idea about. And so I also wasn't hearing it in the studio, sort of thing. You know, when we were mixing it, I did, you know, it was sounding good to me. I would do it slightly differently these days and still try to retain the energy of what we were actually doing. But yeah, if I had the opportunity, I would have a shot at remixing the first album. And it would hopefully be improved upon, which most people think, well, you can't touch that record. And maybe they're right, you know, and the tapes don't exist anyway. So, you know, we haven't got any choice, basically. There is an alternate mix of the first album, which we rejected because it was quite wide stereo. And it's actually a more conventional 70s style rock mix, which will probably, to me, it's really interesting to hear it because it does present the band in a slightly more conventional way, and it sounds really great. And we're hoping to include that as a record in the we're doing like this 4 LP with a booklet box set reissue next year of the first album, and the alternate mix will be included in that. I think some people won't like it, but other people, it makes it sort of sound more like a classic rock record in some ways than the actual release, which will alienate some hardcore followers. Yeah. But I think it's an important part of the story, kind of thing.
Yeah, that will be interesting. The other two releases you have out are your first album, Electrical Storm and Honey Steals Gold, remastered. Do you listen to vinyl yourself? Is that your preferred method of listening to music?
If I actually have the time to sit down and I don't usually put music on in the background anymore, and I haven't done for a really long time. I find it a distraction. My favorite way of listening is to actually sit in the sweet spot between the speakers and listen to a record. Yeah, COVID was great. I mean, for that, I know, I had some time where I would actually just spend days going through my record collection and listen to things that I hadn't listened to for decades, and that was great. And so I listened to vinyl for that sort of thing. But I also shifted to CDs, when they became I mean, CDs were great if you were a traveling musician sort of thing, because you could buy things and listen to them and still have something that you'd listen to at home, as opposed to, picking up new releases on cassette, which I never listened to cassettes at home sort of thing. They were pretty dodgy, erratic, in their quality sort of thing. But so I tend to, like if it's a record, if it's an album from, say, that was released in the 90s or early 2000s, I would have a CD of it, and I don't bother going back to buy the vinyl or anything like that, if it's been reissued or something. But when I started collecting records, when I, listening to music, vinyl was what you had, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I love the format. And the interesting thing to me is that with the remasters of these albums, especially with Honey Steele's Gold, Don Bartley mastered it, and he mastered the original, but the new version actually sounds better. The vinyl quality is really good. It's a sort of golden age for vinyl in a lot of ways at the moment, and yet, you're talking about relatively small quantities of these things going out. I think Honey Steele's Gold might have sold a couple of thousand on its reissue, which is apparently very good.
Yeah.
And yet in the old days, that would have, you'd be thinking, oh, geez, we haven't even covered our costs on that, but so it's a different situation. But yes, to a very long-winded answer to your question there. But I like records are great. They, I mean, there are some really good CDs sonically. I'm not a purist or anything like that, but there is something about records.
Yeah.
There's just a sort of something that kind of just brings the reality of what you're listening to a little closer than a CD maybe does. Certainly more so than streaming or something like that.
Yeah. So Electrical Storm was the first solo album. By the time you recorded Honey Steele's Gold, the fifth, you had many more studio hours under your belt. Did you have a more complete sonic picture of what you wanted from Honey Steele's Gold?
I always had a fairly complete picture of what I wanted, but to say, just to sort of be a bit pedantic, I mean, I had recorded a fair bit more, but all of those records were done very quickly. So it wasn't like I was in the studio for months or anything. Usually a record would be recorded in a couple of days and mixed in a couple of days, sort of thing. I can't remember the exact amount of time we spent on Honey Steele's Gold, but it happened over a month, over a few weekends, kind of thing. So it was still done fairly quickly. I mean, Mark Dawson and Mark being the drummer on that record, we'd been touring Europe as a duo, doing the previous album, Today Wonder, which was acoustic guitar and drums. That was sort of a fairly early guitar and drum record. I don't think anyone had actually really done that apart from maybe a couple of blues sort of people, or if you want to get really sort of esoteric, the first T-Rex album was sort of just essentially guitar and drums and vocal. So we'd already been working on the songs that ended up on most of the songs that had ended up on Honey Steele's Gold over a period of about a year or so. And so it was fairly quick, to get it down and then just overdub a few bits and pieces and mix it.
Yeah.
But the idea, but at the same time, I have an idea of what it should sound like, but by the time you're in the studio and by the time try out a few things. You do, you have got to be open to sort of change your mind and follow what, and you hopefully, what you sort of experiment with kind of stands the test of time. And I think in Honey Steele's Gold case, it does. Electrical Storm was a much, much starker, more simple, raw kind of thing, which I just did by myself, and then we added the drums and the piano later.
Yeah. You're taking well, you're going out on the road tomorrow, playing tracks from those albums. At what point did you decide what gear you're going to take out on the road?
Oh gee, pretty early on. Even though I did add just maybe a week or two before the rehearsals, I decided that I'd take an electric 12-string, which was maybe which is a good decision actually. That sounds great, even though I'm breaking a lot of strings on it. Yeah, pretty early on. I use a fairly simple sort of setup for these type of shows. It's not overly processed in any way whatsoever. It's just a little, it's not pedal city or anything like that. So it's pretty straightforward. Probably much the same as it would have been if I was doing it back in the day.
Yeah. Are you playing the songs as recorded or playing around with arrangements?
I never play the songs as recorded.
Yeah.
No, I mean, people will recognize the songs, hopefully. But I think I made a decision in about 1989 after my band, the pre-Honey Steele's Gold, pre-Today Wonder band that I had, which was called The Yard Goes On Forever, which we toured Australia and Europe and did a couple of US shows over a period of 18 months to promote an album called Everybody's Got To. And, we were totally professional. We presented those songs pretty much as they were on the record. And, I've heard live tapes of those performances, and sometimes you can't tell the versions apart, sort of thing. But after that finished, I just thought I don't want to do that anymore. It's expending energy in a way that I'm not finding creative, and I don't find it as I didn't find it after a while. I didn't find it as being a particularly honest way of presenting the songs. I think you can get to a point where you're putting on a show for people. Some people really like that, I mean, groups like, say, something like the Ramones or something did that, and all kudos to them and respect. It was just not something that I just got sick of the notion of going out and just playing stuff the same way all the time. I just found it a bit of a blanket creatively in a lot of ways. And so when I thought not having a band and just working with a drummer opened a whole lot of things to me. I wanted my playing to kind of get back to something that I thought I sort of heard it in people like John Lee Hooker's playing and the way they did songs, and it just sort of seemed so open, and so you just sort of adapt the performance to how you felt and how the mood in the room was, that kind of thing. That was exciting, and that's what I wanted to move to. So I started to sort of deconstruct songs, to find once you're doing something solo, which has got, and it's a version of a song that you'd written with people in mind. Like, you know, if you've got like, you know, my previous group, Laughing Clowns, you would do horn arrangements. Things would be kind of set. There might be parts of the song which had room for extrapolation, but I just wanted to sort of break everything down to what is the song and then what can I do with it without having to work out something that I had to repeat every time I played it, kind of thing. So that was sort of educational, and I think it took me back to a more core kind of, and both primitive but also a bit transcendental, pardon me, which, you know, that's what I want out of music. I want something to kind of, you know, it's got to kind of engage me too. Otherwise, I don't think I can effectively engage anybody else.
Yeah. You're working on all these re-releases. What about new music? Are you recording or?
I've just finished an album with Jim White, who I toured with. Well, we managed to get a couple of shows in during the COVID era. We did a couple of tours, and we were able to avoid border closures largely by being incredibly nimble. You know, like we'd be in New South Wales, and then suddenly the Queensland border would be closed, and so would have a show in southeast Queensland or something, or a couple of shows, and they would just be cancelled. And so our manager kind of just put the word out in the Northern Rivers, and suddenly you get 4 or 5 venues saying, "Oh, play here," kind of thing. And we did, and we did these shows, and they all sold out. It was sort of like a remarkable sort of outlaw type operation, you know, just operating in this really, okay, we'll get to the next town. Is there anywhere to play? Kind of thing. It was sort of like, you know, just traveling minstrels or something. I can't remember why I got onto that, but yeah, no, yes, I did some recording with Jim. There's that should come out early next year. There's an album, the second Asteroid Ecosystem album. Asteroid Ecosystem is a sort of a more experimental instrumental band that I'm in with Alistair Spence, renowned piano player, and Lloyd Swanton and Toby Hall. That should actually be out in the next month or so. So yeah, there is some new stuff, but I'm not that focused on recordings at the moment. I think the days of like, oh, here's a new album, and having people kind of, you know, queuing up around the block to sort of get their copies, I don't know, seems to be sort of dead. You know, there's not a screaming out for new material. I mean, I'll do it when I feel like it. But on the other hand, the live shows also are kind of a bit new every time we play, sort of thing. So it's a development. And I think also I've come to the conclusion that, you know, I only really write one song, and they're all connected, all those songs, you know, so it doesn't, you know, that's probably a bit of a John Lee Hooker influence too, you know, because I mean, you can buy 12 John Lee Hooker records from a certain period, and they'll pretty much all sound exactly the same with these organic fluctuations, sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've got material together. I will be doing a new record. I haven't worked out yet how I want to record it. I've got to put the right sort of band together for it, and some, yeah, just you know, it's I'm not rushing, but yeah, there will be other new material, but there's a couple coming out anyway, you know, irrespective of what I say about not putting out new work.
Yeah. All right, Ed, it's been great to chat. All the best with the tour, and we'll catch you next time.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice talking to you.
Thanks, Ed.
Bye-bye.
Bye, mate.